In Unit 3, we're going to take a look at how to connect, finally, this is a critical component, I think, finally connect our programs to a database. So that your assignment tracker, if you wanted to switch it from saving to a text file, could save to a database and you could retrieve assignments and bring them back and put them out in the database and do all kinds of stuff with them. This is probably the most valuable skill that you'll learn forever, maybe, how to connect to a database. Critical. It's what we're doing on my Alliance Camp program with the systems implementation class. We're connecting to a database. It's a web database. In this class, we're going to be connecting to an Access database just because it's a little more portable. We could use MySQL that most of you are learning about in RDD, but that's a little trickier. Plus, you've got to have a portable web server. Plus, you've got to have a portable database server. Plus, we're going to stick with Access to make life a little more easy in this class. But the concepts are the same. There's very little that we have to change to connect to a MySQL database besides having a web access server. But once we connect to it, manipulating that data is exactly the same. The skills you're going to learn here using C# to manipulate data will transfer very readily to your web programming, your web data management class. Doing this on the web is not a whole lot different. Doing it on a mobile device, that's different. But it can still be done. The concepts are still there. You can see how much information there is in your book. I believe we're about done with your book. I know there's nothing in Unit 4. I'm trying to remember if there's anything in the book on crystal reports. I doubt it. So we're about done with the book. If we get to Unit 6, chapter on arrays, then we might touch the book again. But most of this stuff you're going to have to grab from my notes and, more importantly, from the samples. Starting in this unit, a lot of what I do in class is going to transfer very readily to your homework. I'm going to be doing example pizza order. When you transfer that example to DVDs or whatever it is that you're trying to track with your database, a lot of the code will go as is. But what I'm learning in my iOS class is just giving you code as is and say, here, use this. It's hard to get your head around what's happening. So I'm going to walk you through the process, and then basically I've given you the code and you can cut and paste it, as long as you know where to cut and paste it and what it's doing and what you need to tweak. This is becoming a big skill now as well. In iOS, when we push a button, we say I want a two-screen app where one has a table view that can scroll. We push a button and it generates thousands of lines of code. And half the time I don't know what this stuff does. I don't think that's good. So I don't want to do that here, but being able to use existing code, putting it together in different ways is becoming another new skill that you as software developers have to learn to do and learn to do well. To Google stuff, find answers that way, and we have to use existing code and reuse it to solve a new problem. So that's also part of what we'll be learning here. So lots of topics. This is one of my longer sets of notes. And right up at the top here it says, assign the Unit 3 Part 1. Oh boy. I don't think we're quite ready for that yet because you're just getting warmed up in Unit 2. Okay. But recognize, guess what we need here? A class. And there's nothing magical about the class. It's the same kind of stuff that we've done before where you need data members and you need a form and you can test some of that. There's going to be validation that you throw in. A lot of that stuff can be done. So if you're bored, you got gas mileage done. I don't think that includes too many people. You can start on this. Otherwise, we'll have to find a date for it later, or very likely we could also get stuck putting two together again. Most business applications require some kind of a database. The typical exception to that is a game, but that's not true anymore either. All games have databases that are their foundation that keeps track of all their different characters and what kind of skills they have and what kind of lifetimes they have and how lethal this weapon is and all that stuff stored in a database. That database is typically a read-only database, but a lot of it can also be saved information about when last time you played this game, you were on level 173, you had 75% life left, and here's what the status of it was. A lot of that could be saved as well. So databases are a critical component of most programs today, except the most simple. And I need to go download something I forgot. Hang on just a second. Before we start writing some code, we got to get some concepts out of the way. Let me return, first of all, to this picture that I showed you in Unit 2. Or maybe it was even Unit 1, where we're talking about how a typical three-tier architecture program is designed. In the future, this will be renamed an MVC model or an MVC technique. Models, views, and a controller that we don't use in a desktop application, but there's also a data component. And so the way we've been building programs, you've been building them this semester already, is you build a GUI that has all the display features, all the I/O, the inputs and the outputs. And then you link that to a business class that has all the business rules in it. What data do we need to store? What are the rules for valid stuff? In this unit, we add the data class. Notice the validation that I have listed in here. None. Which is kind of what I've been saying in RDD, that I don't put much validation in the actual database itself because it's a business rule. I'm going to need it here. I don't want it in two places. And so to centralize it, all the business rules go in here, and this business class is responsible for ensuring that my data is valid before it puts it into the data class. Notice there's no direct connection between the GUI and the data class. You cannot, you should not, in the GUI, directly connect to the data, say, give me this data. What we'll be doing is writing code in the business class because it has the rules for what data to collect. We'll be writing code in the business class. The GUI will request from the business class this piece of information from the database. The database gets the information, sends it back to the business class, who passes it to the GUI. That might sound a little painful. Good news is it's not terribly painful. And it isolates all these components. What's beautiful about this is it is very easy to pull this out, my Access database out, and replace it with a MySQL database. Replace it with an MS SQL Server database. I can just pull this component out, and if my database program like Access is too small and it can't handle what I need it to do after an amount of time, I can pull that out and replace it with some more powerful database program. And most of the rest of this is going to be unaffected by that. The only thing that will be affected is what's called the connection. How do I connect between these two? We have to teach business class to connect to a MySQL database. But once they're connected, everything else goes. So that's the beauty of this, and that's one of the reasons we write programs this way, is so that we have that flexibility and that expandability. That's all well and good. So here, let's draw that picture one more time in a different way. The Visual Studio project or products, C#, Visual Basic, etc., use a component called ADO, it's an active data object, to connect to a database. It is a built-in class, predefined, stored on your Windows computer someplace, that knows how to talk to databases. And if it doesn't, you can teach it how to talk to different kinds of databases. So we tie all that together with the three-tier architecture, and this is what it ends up looking like. You've got a GUI, and it's got a bunch of forms, or a bunch of fields on the form. Could have cool buttons, could have graphics, could have all the junk you want. It's just a GUI. That GUI, when it needs data, is going to communicate with the business class. It's going to say, I need this data out of the database. We have that third class now. Here's our three-tier architecture again. Each is responsible for different stuff. Input and output. Business rules, and also communication with the database. This is kind of, let's call it a linking class. I don't like to do that, but it's kind of what that does, is it links these two together so I can show data. Goes through here, and then back again. Let's see that. This data class is not your database. Right? Don't get me wrong here. The data class is code that somebody has written to communicate with the database. So this is pre-written code that we are going to take advantage of to communicate with different kinds of databases. In this class, the database is always an Access database. the first thing we need to do is create some kind of a connection between our program and that database, and that's done using the data class. This little pathway here is called a connection, and it communicates with a data provider. This data provider has to be provided to you, Visual Studio programmer. You don't write it, it's given to you. And what it does is it translates Visual Studio commands into something that your database can understand. Where do you get these? Well, the ones we need come with Visual Studio. MS SQL Server, if we were using that, comes with Visual Studio. The provider for MS SQL Server comes with Visual Studio. The provider for Access, ADO.NET, comes with Visual Studio. If we wanted to connect to MySQL, most database websites, like the MySQL website, have the ability to download a provider for Visual Studio. So they give you this piece of code. They write it and say, when we get this from the data class, here's what we would translate it into so that MySQL can understand it. And this data provider actually does it the other way too. Here's some data. It turns it into something that the data class can understand. So this is given to you, but you need to know it's there. The data class has the ability to store information about tables. One of the first things we're going to do is start building table adapters. This is us telling the data class that you're going to be communicating with this table and this table and this table and this table and this table. And here are the SQL commands. We have to provide those. Here are the SQL commands that I'm going to be asking you later to execute. These SQL commands have the same format as the SQL commands you're learning in RDD. Those of you that aren't in RDD, doesn't matter. I'll give you the ones you need for this class. But any SQL command that you're going to learn to write in the RDD class, you can actually type into here and communicate it to the database through Visual Studio. So we're going to have all these table adapters. And really all they are is definitions of the tables that we're communicating to and what kind of commands we're going to send them. So somewhere on my form I have a button. The user says, go get this. Using a button, using a combo box, we're going to use a data grid. There's all kinds of ways that the GUI, the user, can communicate to the program that I want you to go get this record. Go get Matt's record for programming logic intermediate, whatever that means. So the user clicks the button, and that then calls a method, really. This button will call a fill method in the business class. The fill means fill up a data table. We'll see the data tables here in just a second. That fill method then figures out which one of these SQL commands did he just request and tells it to execute. The SQL command gets sent to the data provider, which then translates it into Access in this case. Access says, okay, I understand. Here's the data you requested. The table adapter then this is a copy. Notice we're not in the database anymore. The data got sent to my program. We are not directly linked to the database. When you're manipulating data in your C# programs, you're manipulating a copy. And at some point, you're going to have to issue a command that says, I'm done messing with this, save the new version to the database. You will always have a copy. Another very important feature is this connection. Once we've received the data, the connection is automatically cut. This allows multiple users, multiple programs, multiple copies of the same program to all hit the same database at the same time. Access even allows up to, I think it's supposedly 25 users. I've found that it starts bogging down when 5 or 6 people are hitting it at the same time. MySQL, it just snaps all the time. It doesn't seem to matter. It's more powerful. But by disconnecting, our program has said, thank you for the data. I no longer need connection to the database. We're not directly connected at all times to the database, only when we need to be. This is called a connectionless system. All databases, all program languages today are connectionless. They don't stay connected to the database. The term exists because back when I wrote my first version of Alliance Camp in VB6, that was a connection state program, and I controlled it. I had to write code to say, connect me. I had to write code that says, thank you, I got the data, disconnect me. And if I ever forgot that, I'd have this connection and basically sucking up one of the ports in that database so that nobody else could get at it. Today, that doesn't happen. We don't issue connection commands. We say, gimme, and we say fill, and it just makes the connection automatically. Because when this table adapter does its stuff, it makes the connection, receives the answer, and immediately cuts the connection. Maybe thousandths of a second. Very efficient, and lets the database be used by multiple users. So now, we've gotten the data. That data needs to be put someplace. Remember, this is a copy. What you will learn to do is create a data table. This is just another class that's built into C#. You'll learn to create a data table that has the ability to store the data that you got out of the database. It's very dynamic. It can have as many rows as it needs. It can have as many fields as it needs. The data table is very flexible. I'll show you how to build it, and then what happens is all this happens automatically. I'm doing this in pieces. You click the button, we execute the fill command, which executes some SQL, gets the data, and puts it into a data table. It's kind of all one big step in our mind. Once it's in the data table, now your program has access to it. And it can request 6 rows, 10 rows, 20 rows, all the rows, 1 row, whatever we want. What we typically do with this data table is transfer the data that's in here into the business class. Think of your members, right? And so we take the first name out of the data table. We take the last name out of the data table. We take the phone number out of the data table, and we put them in the business class, in the properties. Notice we're going to the properties. Because we're going to the properties, they get validated, right? So if some bad user goes into the database and changes data manually and screws it up, your program is going to say, I got bad data out of the database for student number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I get the sheepish phone call from my users going, I got this database message customer. I said, what did you do? Somebody playing in a database? Oh no, nobody playing in the database. Okay, I'll be there in a couple hours, and I fix it. Because I know where the record is. I know how to look around in a database. They do too, unfortunately. And occasionally they go in there and they change something, and they put bad value in. So remember, the business class, again, is responsible for ensuring the data that goes into the database is valid. But in our case, the way we're going to write it, it's also going to check the data that comes out to make sure it's valid in case somebody messed around in there. That shouldn't happen very often. But it's easy for us to do because we already have these properties. You already wrote them. You wrote the property to validate somebody's first name. It's required. It can't be blank. It can't be longer than 20 characters. You already wrote all that code. We're going to use the exact same code to test what came out of the database to see if it still meets all those rules. Once they're in the properties, then we can transfer them from the properties onto the form. And so again, this is a long, drawn-out process. The user said, give me Matt's data. Okay, this is the command, find Matt's data. Here you go, put it in a data table, put it in the properties, show it on the form. It all happens pretty much instantaneously. But this cycle goes on and on and on all day long when your program is running. Every time you ask for a new record. Okay, now I want to see Karen's record. Click the Karen row, give me Karen's data, here you go, put it in the data table, put it in the property, show it on the form. Over and over and over again. So this is where the 3-tier comes in. Notice there's no direct connection here. There's not even a direct connection here from my business class. It goes through the data class. Now here's the good news. You're already getting tired of classes, right? Because which class am I in? Am I in the GUI? Am I in the business class? Now we're adding a third one. Oh my God. I'm going to keep all that straight. You will never mess with this one. You never write code for the data class. It's pre-built. All we do is use it. So all you have to learn how to do is use it. And so if something's wrong, it's not the data class because you never wrote any code in there. It's your business class or it's your GUI that's screwing stuff up. So even though we've added that third tier, we're really not adding any complexity to the code that you write. But don't get me wrong, this big ugly loop here is complex. I will come back to this drawing. This drawing is actually in my notes as well in its entirety. We'll come back to this drawing quite a bit to keep track of where are we and what are we doing. We'll build table adapters. We'll define this connection. We'll select, we won't write any code, we won't go get one, we will select a provider. Then we'll start issuing commands, and when the commands send us data, we'll create a data table to hold it. And then we'll learn how to transfer the data from here, which doesn't do as much good, to properties, and then onto the form so the user can see it, change it, and then when the user gets saved, guess what happens? We start all over again. Except instead of the fill method, we hit a save method. And the save method writes code, puts data out to the database. And at that point, nothing comes back because we have a duplicate. We saved our changes. This, if you look at it right, is kind of a loop. That loop gets used over and over and over again. I know that's a lot. Questions off the top of your head? We'll come back to it. So those are all the concepts. We make sure I just didn't miss anything here. Okay, we can use any kind of database. Once you define the connection, yep, here's that picture I promised you. It's a little different format, but it's the same picture. It doesn't show you that this connection is automatically created and automatically cut as soon as created when we need it and cut when we're done with it automatically. Those table adapters, going back to the picture, remember that was these guys here that let us communicate with the database. The table adapters have built into them CRUD processing. Remind me, what does CRUD stand for? C, create. R, read. U, update. D, delete. Those are the four things that we do on a regular basis with data. We read it. We create new data, like we were doing in RDD today. We created new data. Then when we issued the select command, we were reading that data. Show it to me. What we haven't learned how to do yet is update existing data that's out there, and we haven't learned how to delete records from the database. That's probably next Tuesday in RDD. But only the snippets. The details on how to do that comes a little later in the semester. But that's what we do with data. It's called CRUD processing because any other combination of the words don't mean anything, of the letters don't mean anything. CRUD's fairly easy to remember. But we insert, we update, delete, and select or read data. Databases are automatically disconnected. Once we've filled them, they go into a data table. I'll try to bring that diagram up here at the same time. I'll be right with you. There it is. Once we use the table adapter, this is kind of a translator, is one way I put it. It's a translator, takes my instructions, gets the data, and puts them into data tables. So we have to learn how to do that. We fill our data table with a copy of the data, I said that. And then we figure out how to display it. I talked about connected versus disconnected databases. Connected is old school, VB6. Disconnected is pretty much every database connectivity type system today. All providers automatically connect and automatically disconnect when it's appropriate. We don't have to worry about it anymore. So that's cool. All right, to our program. Now I'll start doing some of this stuff. The first thing we need to do is add a database to our project. Here's my project. I downloaded, this is Unit 2, Pizza Shop Order 1, where we ended at the end of the last unit. And I just simply changed the folder name to 3 to remind me that this is the Unit 3 version of it. But this is the Pizza Shop order where we left it. I now want to add a database to it. This first step and all of its functionality is fairly critical. Need to launch my program. I've already launched mine. And I now want to add, actually, timeout, missed a step. Here's my database. It's on my desktop. I could potentially add it right from the desktop. But that makes me a little leery because what happens if it doesn't copy it? Then I got desktop, I got the database here and the program over there. It makes me a little nervous. It normally works, but I want to be safe. I have opened up the folder for Pizza Shop 3. And I'm going to open up the project folder. That's the one in the same folder with the SLN. Here's the SLN file. I'm going to open up the project folder. That's where all my forms and all my classes are and everything else that I've got. And I'm going to copy the database into there. I'm a chicken, so I'm going to copy it, not move it. That way, if something goes wrong, and something might, there are things that can go wrong in this process. If something goes wrong, I still have the original database here. It's still on OneDrive. I could go get it from there. But real world, you want to make a backup of your database if you're connecting to a real one, because there is a way to mangle this database if we're not careful. So now this database is in my project. And the next thing I want to do is create a connection to that database. You don't connect to Access, you connect to a database that happens to be of type Access, right, Microsoft Access. You connect to the database. You do this by creating a data source. That's what it's called. We connect to it. Done the database. So how do we connect to it? First thing we need to do is open the data sources window. Now sometimes, or in the last bunch of units since Programming Logic beginning, I've had you close it. It would normally be under here, under the team or near the Team Explorer. This is where I like to see my data sources. You can also show it over here by your toolbox, whichever you're more comfortable with. But right now we've closed it so that it wasn't distracting you last semester or last unit. Now we need it back again. So we need to go to View, Other Windows, Data Sources. View, Other Windows, Data Sources. Once you add this, it'll stay there unless you close it, and you're going to have databases in every program from now on, so data sources are going to be part of your life. Even if they show up in your gas estimate program, don't worry about it. They're not causing any trouble. You're just not using them. And so it put them over here. I kind of prefer it over here, so I'm going to drag it and park it in that little middle square there. And now my data sources are in the same tab over here with my Solution Explorer, and I can get back and forth between them. That's my preference. You could park it over here. It doesn't make any difference. Everybody wants to be with me? We want to add a new data source. It is conceivable, I don't do it very often, it is conceivable to write a program with multiple data sources. I need some stuff out of that database, I need some stuff out of this database. Normally you connect to one database and you read and write and CRUD process to one database. But it is possible to connect to multiples. Primary reason I do that is because I'm trying to transfer the data from this database into a different one. So I connect to that one, read it, grab the data. Then I connect to this database and write to it. We're not going there, but it's perfectly feasible. So in all of your programs, you're going to add one data source, and once it's there, you're done. So let's add a data source. What kind of data source? There's different kinds. A service is a web service. There are plenty of places on the web that have databases full of stuff. And those web providers, those like Flickr, for instance, in my iOS class this last couple weeks ago, Sean showed us how to take advantage of the Flickr service. Flickr is just a bunch of free open source pictures. Well, how do you get those off the web into this program? You use a service. They teach you how to connect your program to their website so that you can download photos from Flickr. We learned how to do it on an iPhone. Wasn't terribly hard. beyond the scope of this course. You're going to learn how to do that next year. We could connect to an object. No. We could connect to SharePoint. No way. SharePoint is just a big, huge database of documents. You could connect to those some other day. We're connecting to a database always. So next, what kind of model do you want to use? Notice how many choices we have. Next. And now the first question they want is, what kind of object are you going to be connecting to? What kind of database? Which connection do you want to use if we might have a pre-built one? We don't. So we're going to build a new connection. This is also a one-time bad deal unless the connection gets mangled somehow, and that's pretty rare. Now here, remember our trusty dusty provider that does the translation? Now it's asking us, what kind of database are you going to be going against? I'm going to be accessing a Microsoft Access database. What that says is, hey, you Visual Studio, make me a provider so I can communicate. Or go get the provider in this case, because it already exists. Go get me the provider for Microsoft Access. Notice I could use Microsoft SQL Server, I could use SQL Server Database File, I could use Oracle. If the one you want isn't on the list, then you can choose other. We're not going to do that, but if you choose other, then you get into a whole different set of dialog boxes where you have to go find the provider and point to it and tell it what type it is and give it a name and all this. Definitely possible. Most of the websites, like the mysql.org, where you went to download the workbench, they have a provider page to download the provider and even teach you how to connect to it. I'm not going to we don't have the time. I've also chosen to use this as the default, so the next time I create a connection, it always thinks it's access. Whether you checked it or not, it's up to you. Okay, it's an Access database. That's cool. Where is it? Please. Where is it? Browse and find it. Right, now we just put it in the project folder. My recommendation is don't grab the spare one that I got on my desktop. That's my backup just in case something goes bad. So we go browse, and on my desktop I have my project folder, Unit 3 Pizza Shop. Inside the project folder, there's my pizza orders. Notice it's only showing Access databases. Yes, you can connect to an MDB, the old style Access databases. Still works. This connection provider allows us to talk to any kind of Access database, new or old. Everybody find it? Somebody say no? You sure? Here's my database. You can double click it or you can click it and click open.
Wait, did we have to have anything? So there's a data source and then there's also the database file name, right? We just have to.
It'll fill that in for you here. So now we're back. Right? We had to create the connection. We're using Access, and here's the file name. Okay. We don't have a password on this database. I don't recommend putting passwords on your database, but if you've got one that's got super secret stuff in it that you don't want anybody to know, you can put a password on it. But then you have to enter it here so that your program can access it without you having to enter the password later, which kind of defeats the purpose, I think. We could test the connection. This almost never fails. That's long enough. Thank you. The only way it would fail is if you grab the wrong file, which is hard to do, or you grab the wrong database type. Click on OK. And now what it's created is our little tunnel. It has created a connection to the Pizza Orders ACCDB. That's the Access database. So this tunnel, if you will, has now been created with its translator in between. Next. The connection needs a local copy of this. Do you want the database? Now this is where you could screw things up if you're not careful. Okay. The connection uses a local data file that is not in your project. Do you want to see the database in your Solution Explorer? Sure. That's what this is saying. I'm translating. Now, here's the trick. There's already one there in your project folder. Would you like me to overwrite it? Remember that one that's in my project folder? I just selected it. Now I'm going to overwrite it with itself. It's like a snake eating its tail. It starts deleting records and wiping them out. And at some point it goes, what the heck am I? And it quits. And it trashes your database. This one, the answer is no. Don't replace it. Just use it. Click no to use the file that's already there. So this is the one place where you could mangle a database. What do you want to call it? I don't usually rename my connection strings because I never refer to them in code. So this works just fine for me. If you want to rename it CS pizza orders, you can for connection string, but I also use CS or CLS for class. I just leave it alone. Next. Now, what do you want to bring in? We can bring in tables or views. Boy, am I glad you people are here. What's another name for views? Huh? Nope. Queries. Remember access? You can build tables and saved queries. You can actually bring in your saved queries. Real programmers don't use access queries. And you're all real programmers now. I've given you your little deputy programmer badge, so you're ready to go. But we do want all the tables. We could select which tables we want. Right now, this database only has one table in it. Hard to imagine. It is not third normal form for all you RDD experts. It's a simple table for us to learn how to connect to a table, get data out, put data back in. Will complicate the issue in Unit 4. So yes, I want that table. You check it. You could, I've never left fields out. I don't know why you do that. Normally I just check tables. If you have 17 tables, you'll get them all. What's happening here is Visual Studio has looked inside of Access and said, oh, I found a table. And if it finds 17, you'll see all 17, and you'll want all 17. And what it's going to do is create one of these table adapters for every single one of your tables, automatically. Don't have to write any code. So you pick all the tables and then finish. And there's our tables. So now we have a data source. We can use this TBL orders as a data source. Notice there's a data set that kind of wraps around it. Don't worry about that. Your table is here. That's what's important. And again, if you have multiple tables, they'd all be listed here, just like they are in the Navigator in MySQL Workbench. At this point, we're almost done with the data sources. We're going to abuse them a little bit, but not much. I'm going to try to drag this so it's at the end because I don't use it very much. And here's my solution. And notice because we said yes, copy it into my solution, I can see the database. I can double click it and look around. I'm looking at the real database now. This is a bit dangerous, but you can look around. I don't do that very often. It's nice to see the database though. Here is what was created by that process we just generated, that we just went through. The XSD, X stands for XML, and the S and the D are system data, something like that. I forget all the terminology. But this is a text description of your database, including, and it's not SQL, it's XML, different language. Most of you haven't seen it yet. But it describes the structure of that database table. It describes all the fields that are in that table. Everything's stuck inside that XSD, but it's text. What it doesn't have is the data. It describes the fields, describes the tables, but it doesn't have the actual data. This is used when you get the data to say, here's the columns I need. How many rows do we need? I don't know, it depends on how many he asked for. But this is the foundation for all of our data access. This is that data class. This guy right here. It's done. We get to tweak it, but we don't have to write any code. If we go inside there, go ahead and open it because we're going to do it frequently. There's a data table. I'm sorry, a table adapter, not data table. This is a table adapter. See, I said there's lots of table adapters in here. One for every single table. If you got multiples, they just go across the screen here. You got 17, you get to scroll. You can drag them around, reorganize them. Here's a list of all the fields. And even cooler, it has given us the SQL to go get everything out of that database or out of that table. So I hovered and you could see that as a select command, right? But if you right click, please, we can configure that and look at it a little bit closer. I can't make this larger, but if you right click this table adapter, you can see that it created a select command just like we did in RDD today. We created a select star. They did it the long way, listed every single one of their fields. You could actually modify this and put a star there and get exactly the same results. From, just like we did, TBL orders. All of this is based around an SQL statement. It gave us one for free, which is, this is basically select star from TBL orders. Gave it to us for free. All the rest we have to come up with, and we will, and I'll show you how. But we now have data. I'm going to cancel that because I really don't want to change anything. So the XSD has all of my table adapters in it. We don't spend a lot of time here, but we spend a little bit of time. We don't write any code, but we do write SQL. Uh-oh. What if I don't know SQL? You will. And for this class, the SQL, you're going to basically cut and paste. Steal the stuff that I do as examples and use it in yours. Things are getting complicated, right? Mm-hmm. You can close this. What it's asking you if you want to save is I move this around a little bit. It's really saving the layout. And so if you have 17 of these and you've arranged them in your perfect order, just the way you like them, my advice is do a save all before you try to leave. Save all saves the layout. I'm just going to say no, it was fine the way it was before. But now look at this. My Solution Explorer's got a class, and it's got a form, and it's got a database, and it's got an XSD, and it's got tools. In the future, you're going to have programs with 17 tables in them. Pretty much a one-to-one relationship between tables and classes. So you'll have a program with 17 classes, not one, 17 different classes that communicate with tables. You'll have 17 table adapters in the XSD, not one. And you'll probably have more than one form. Maybe not 17, maybe 30, maybe 10. You can imagine how interesting, that's my term, how interesting the Solution Explorer gets with all that stuff. But this is still my GUI, this is my business class, and now this is my data class. Those three pieces tie together. Now before we quit, let's open up Form Pizza. Actually, no, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm sorry. Go ahead and close it. Let's add a new form. I just want to show you something. To add a new form, I'm using a second button. If you're using my toolbars, it's that second one. If not, it's the one with one big dark square. Drop it down. I want to add a new form. Add a Windows form. Now we get a nice blank one. What do we want to call it? That's fine. Don't even rename it because this is just temporary. Demonstration purposes only. Make it bigger. And now let me show you some magic. I'm going into my data sources. And here's my table. I believe, yep. I can drag this table onto my form. Oh my goodness, look what it just did. It made me like an access table thingy with a nav bar. Cool, and record counters and saves and adds and deletes, and that's really awesome. And we can park this. I don't think we have to stretch it. I think it automatically stretches, but just in case, there we go. And notice it's got all my column names in it. Oh, all my field names are there already. Now, if I run this, we're going to get the pizza order form. So the next thing we're going to do is change the startup just temporarily so we can see if this really works. We have to go to Program CS in the Solution Explorer right there. And down here it says application run new form pizza. I'm going to comment that one out because we're going to go back to it and put in application run new FRM. No, it's not even called FRM. New form 1. That's that temporary form we just created. Said, don't start with the pizza form. Start with that temporarily. I hit run and, uh-oh. Doing too much Swift. Forget semicolons. Requires parentheses. Okay. After form 1, parentheses. You happy now? Looks like it. So now I run, and with any luck, we are connected to our Access database. Whoa. Cool. No, not cool. Because we're now using a GUI that's directly connected to the database. Not cool. Not to the database, but to the data class. Not cool. That's not 3-tier architecture. Visual Studio gives you this capability. If you're new at it, you might try it just to make sure your connection string is working. But here's all my data. And I can go in here and change this so that Igor bought a pepperoni pizza. I can change it and then hit save and it'll save it. I'm done. Okay, when do we want the program to do? No. There's no way to validate this because the rules are cut out of the loop. The rules are out of the loop. So we can do this. It's great for testing now that we've verified it. We can get rid of it. Now, I don't want you to follow this time. Look at all this junk it made down here. Made binding sources and table adapters and managers and what is all that junk? Well, the good news is we're throwing this form away so we don't need it. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff and show you one more thing. Going back to my data source. Remember I dragged this table over, right? I believe I can change this and say, give me a details view instead. The first thing it gave me was a grid. That's what that thing was called. It's a data grid. We're going to use one of those. It's just not going to be huge, monster full. I can also ask for details view. And now when I drag it, oh, no way.
How do you?
I drop down the list and change to details view. Look, date picker, text boxes, text boxes, text boxes, check boxes. It's got some stupid names, but notice it even took the, we gave it camel case, it added spaces. Cool. And I can run. And it put all the junk back down at the bottom again. Oh man, 424 rows, next, no way. Done, let's quit. Nope, can't validate. Sorry. But a lot of people write these for quick looks in their database, have it handy someplace so they can run this secret form. They can look in the database and see what's going on. There's not a search feature here, so that's kind of painful, right? I've got 424 pizza orders and I can't search by name, by date, by whatever. I just have to know the ID number of the record. And of course, we all know what those are. Useless. How would I know? The check boxes are a little funky. Maybe some of these could be combo boxes. Maybe these should be radio buttons for size. But it does a pretty decent job. And so when you're building your Unit 3 form, you can say, hey, you, data source, give me all the fields. And then when you're done, you just delete all this stuff down here at the bottom, because those we don't need. And now you got a form that's no longer connected to the database, but your form is already built. You don't have to do it manually. I wish it could have done a combo box for my soda. It could have if I thought about it ahead of time. Because here's soda, and I can drop that down and say, give me a combo box. And it'll give me a combo box. What's in it? Oh, I don't know. I got check boxes for these. Could I have asked for radio buttons? No, there's no way to do radio buttons. But look, it did 3/4 of my form for me. But each one of these has got a stupid name that Volker's not going to like. They're not terrible names, but they're backwards, right? We're used to prefixes first, then the name. Some people like them the other way because you get the name, which is important first, and then it tells you afterwards what type it is. You want to stick with that, be consistent, but it gets a little old when you have to type them in all the time. But that's magic. Okay, enough magic. I'm going to leave, no, I'm not even going to leave the form there. I'm going to cut this and put that back, and you want to follow this part. Remember, this is in the program CS file. I want to go back to form pizza. I showed you that that's possible because all the books do, and then everybody stops. But you are not rookie programmers, you are three-tier programmers, and we want to be able to do validation, and the only way to do that is put the business class in between. So we can't use those nice, convenient little features, but we could use them a little bit to build forms to save us a little bit of time. So I've done that. Now go back to the Solution Explorer and delete Form 1. Right-click, delete. And just as a test so that we're not broken when we come back on Tuesday, let's make sure this runs and shows me my pizza order. Where's all the data? Sorry, we're not connected to the database anymore. That's what we start working on Tuesday, is now what do we do so that we can go get data and actually throw it on the form through the business class. Where am I in my notes? Oh, God, I don't know. I think my notes, there's disconnected, adding a data source and what to select. So if you miss some of that, this works pretty well. Ooh, I said change. Ooh, we didn't do that. We're going to have to practice that when we come back on Tuesday. I forgot to change the data set name. The data set, data source, very similar. It's my one name for here's my connection to the database. I forgot to change that. So when we come back on Tuesday, we'll do that again. Then I showed you how to drag and view data on the form using that grid that doesn't do three-tier. And here's the detail records using the detail view, and you could steal those as a form if you wanted to. Hang on. So when we come back on Tuesday, we're going to learn how to, first of all, create a selection grid. How do I know which order I want to look at? Because at any given time, this form shows me one order. Another pretty good rule for database development is get as little data out of the database as you can at any given time because you're getting a copy of it. If I bring in all 424 of my pizza orders, they're going to take up a chunk of RAM. So what we're going to learn to use is a very efficient method of, I'm only getting one record at a time. Which one do you want? I want Robert's pizza order for February 26, 2015. Which one's that? I don't know. Give me your pizza order ID number, please. No. We'll find a way. But at any given time, we're only going to have one pizza order in memory at any given time. You want a different one? Click a button, you get a different one. So that's very efficient. We don't have copies of 424 records. We got copies of one. And we'll learn how to do that. You want your question on the recording, or is it?
Oh no, I was just, I did something. And
Broke it?
When I click on it, it highlights instead of like having a cursor.
Insert.
Yeah, it's like,
Oh, I forget what the, yeah, we'll fix that. Okay.